competing with the air conditioner, he says. That's hard. Okay. The air conditioner obviously is doing a good job, Joanne. It's pretty chilly here. And a few weeks back, brought a lesson in which I talked a lot about King Solomon. And I want to refresh your mind on that before we move forward with the wisdom of Christ is the subject for today. And there's an awful lot you could say about King Solomon. He was a man who really seemed to love the Lord a lot as a young person who went to God and asked him to bless him with wisdom to rule the kingdom. He admitted, I'm just a child. I'm just a young boy. And I don't have the ability perhaps to do what I need to do as king. Help me, give me wisdom. And God did. And God gave wisdom to Solomon and very great insight. I think I'm a little too reverbing here, Joanne, a little bit, maybe. Yeah, I hear an echo on it. You do? Yeah. Can we turn it down just a little bit? It's good to have a small crowd like this. You can just do anything you want to do, you know. As a matter of fact, I was on the air, like I mentioned, this last night, and Danny called me. He forgot that I was on the air, and all the people in Venezuela and Colombia that love him and know him as well as me and Bruce were, I think, thankful when I answered the phone and said, "Hey, Danny, I'm talking to all the people in South America that you know and love." And anyway, it went over quite well. It wasn't a disturbance at all, Danny. It was a joy. And in 1 Kings 4:29 through 30, where we were reading there, God gave Solomon wisdom. He asked for it, and he got it. That's how our God is. And very great insight. And a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. That's a lot of grains. And it says that God blessed him with an abundance of understanding, an abundance of knowledge and wisdom. And that's what he had asked for, and that's what God gave him. Solomon's wisdom was greater than all the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. When you start thinking about just Egypt and the pyramids, the Sphinx, as you think about the buildings that they erected along the Nile River, all of the structures they had, their knowledge of math and things of that nature, and the great architects they had to have. And then the libraries. Unfortunately, the Romans burned, perhaps by accident, but they burned the books that were written by the great scholars of Egypt and Alexandria one night, and a huge fortune of knowledge was just up in smoke. But the Egyptians had a lot of knowledge and a lot of talent in many areas. And in the East, you have to think about Persia. And you have to think about the great leaders they had in Babylon, the power they had, the structures they built as well. And understand that these were not foolish people, not ignorant people. These were not somebody that just tried to make a living doing whatever little trade they could pick up. These were really scholars, and they had a lot of knowledge. When you hear about the birth of Jesus in the scriptures, you have these guys show up from over in Persia. The Magi come. Well, where did they know to go? And what made them think that a king had been born in the land of Judea? Well, because Daniel, who was taken away into Babylonian captivity, probably shared that news and gave those prophecies to them so that they could anticipate that when a star, an unusual star, appears in the sky in the east, that a king is going to be born in that land and that they should visit him. And they came bearing gifts. And it's just an incredible story. They were wise men and they were following their star. And then we come along and we read that Solomon asked God to give him wisdom, and he was given wisdom in abundance and was wiser than the men of Egypt, the scholars they had, wiser than the philosophers and the stargazers of Persia. And that's how he ruled his people, because he had those gifts. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, we're told, and his songs numbered 1,005. And we have the book of Proverbs. We have the book of Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon. What a beautiful story that you have there that probably was used in weddings in those days. And all of it is produced by Solomon because God gave him the wisdom to write down those proverbs. I have had many friends that have just conducted their entire life and even their business life based on what they read in the book of Proverbs and have been very successful because of it. And I think that it would still work today for anyone that wanted to really dig into the book of Proverbs and follow all of the admonitions that are given there. He was wise, and he was a lover of God. He loved to sing. He loved to hear songs. He loved to humble himself before the Lord, who had given him so much wisdom and so many things. Listen to what it says he was able to talk about. He spoke about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows on the walls and down in Jerusalem. And he also spoke about animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. From all nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. All the kings of the world had heard about Solomon. And multitudes of these leaders came to sit at his feet and enjoy hearing what he had to say and learning from him. I laugh because I think about the fact that we have the book of Proverbs in our homes. Probably most of us have 20 copies or less, but we have all of that wisdom written down for us. The book of Ecclesiastes, for some of us that are getting gray-headed, it's all in there. And sometimes I think we don't take advantage of the wisdom that has been offered to us through the writings of Solomon. What a wise man. But, you know, humans have a tendency, because we're made out of dust and clay, to be sometimes a little bit absent-minded about what we've read, what we've learned, what we know. And as a consequence, we don't act as wisely as the wisdom that we have received from God would allow. And so Solomon blew it. And Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, who he married. That was one of his many brides, one of the daughters of Pharaoh. These were for alliances between nations. Kings would get to know kings, and they would give their children one to the other in marriage. And that would create a bond that they hope would maintain an atmosphere of peace and prosperity between the two nations. And so he had wives that were Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, all the great nations round about. But God said, you must not intermarry with these ladies, with these people, with these men, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. And God was protecting his own territory here, but he had every right to. He's the creator of the universe. He's a real being and not a false idol that somebody can stick up on their wall and light a candle to or worship. And so he says, don't intermarry with all of these people. That's not good. You're going to end up following their gods. And he became an idolater because of his wives that he took into his home. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He was enamored by them, and so he stayed with them and wanted them to stay with him, and it ruined his life. He had 700 wives of royal birth, princesses, one translation says. That's a lot of weddings to go to, especially when they're all yours. And I can tell you something else. That's the task, to be the husband of 1,000 women, because he also had 300 concubines, and his wife led him astray. I try hard to please Kelly, but it's not always easy, you know? But if I had 1,000 Kellys, I think I'd go crazy for sure. And I appreciate her, I love her, but 1,000 women, that sounds here on the top, just Just throw it out there. Sounds like a great blessing. 1,000 women. But once you've got 1,000 in your house, reminding you that you didn't take your medicine this morning, or that you haven't eaten your breakfast fully, or trying to find out what you want for dinner, that would be a hazard. But King Solomon, the worst thing of all was he listened to them when they did tell him about the gods they worshiped in their land. And he permitted it to happen in Israel. He permitted God's people to fall into idolatry. And that proved that even though he was very smart, very intelligent, very informed, and knew a great deal about life and all of the elements of life and everything that you can do in life and so forth, he allowed his wisdom to escape him as he began to worship false gods along with these women and allowed him to do the same. But then Jesus comments on Solomon's life, and he said the queen of the south, one of the persons that came to visit Solomon, was a female, and she was a queen, and she was probably from an area down near Ethiopia. And it says the queen of the south will rise at the judgment. She's going to be at the judgment scene. And why is she going to be there? We're all going to be there. That's going to happen to everybody. We're going to God's judgment on the last day. The queen of the south will rise at the judgment with the people of this generation and condemn them. How? By her good example. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom. And now something greater than Solomon is here. And that's why I was chuckling earlier about the fact that we have so many copies of the book of Proverbs. We don't really study it like we can and should. I mean, we have Solomon right there sitting on the coffee table, and we don't listen to what he revealed to the Israelites from the mind of God. And so the queen of the south is going to judge us in the sense that God, when we say, well, I was busy, I had too many things to do, I didn't get around to really reading and doing all you want me to do. And excuses, excuses, excuses. He's going to say, this lady got in a horse-drawn vehicle and traveled from deep in Africa up to Israel to be able to hear the wisdom of Solomon, what I had taught Solomon, what I informed Solomon about. And you, what have you done? You haven't really tried to become wise like he was. And so we're told that somebody better than him was coming. And that's what was just announced. And then here we find it happened in Luke 2, what was suggested previously about a greater than Solomon is here, but you haven't listened to him. You haven't given him the time of the day, as we would say now. Here's Jesus. Jesus came and was much wiser, much more knowledgeable than Solomon. Why? Solomon saw the universe, some of it at least, a little bit with his naked eye. But Jesus was there when it was created, according to John chapter 1. And he was God with us, Emmanuel. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. But that was God that was sitting there. And when he was a little boy and his parents took him at 12 years of age to the temple in Jerusalem for the Passover, and he got with the great wise men of Israel, supposedly wise, asking them questions and answering their questions. His parents were worried because they'd gone 3 days down the road and realized that Jesus wasn't with the other kids. And so Mary came back looking for him and found him at the temple talking to these great men. We read after 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them. That's easy to do if you're a little boy. And asking them questions. Well, yeah, even a 12-year-old can come up with questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. He was engaged in dialogue with these scholars, these people who really knew the law of God in and out. And he was communicating in a way that was very intelligible and that reflected his wisdom, even though he was a little boy. And then in Luke 2:52, we read, and Jesus grew in wisdom. His wisdom just got greater and greater and greater as time went on. And stature, he grew up, became a man, and in favor with God and man. He was living a good life, appreciating the opportunities he had to serve God and be obedient to his parents, we're told. But then the time came when he was 30 years old, it was time to get out and go and preach. And instead of just sitting on the steps of the temple in Jerusalem and listening to the scholars, he presented himself as a rabbi. He presented himself as a teacher, as a lecturer, as somebody that really knew God, and somebody that was God, and somebody that was going to reveal God to these people. And on the mount, when he sat down on a rock to teach these people, thousands of people gathered to hear him, and they were amazed at his teaching. They loved it, and we are too. If you go back and read Matthew 5, 6, and 7, you're going to see things like the Beatitudes. You're going to see that short little prayer that Jesus gave as a model for how we ought to pray. To the Jews, it was alarming probably when he said, "Our Father who is in heaven." They were accustomed to addressing God by saying, our God, the Father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but not saying, "Our Father." They weren't that close to God, the Creator. And they didn't understand the relationship they could have with him, and that Jesus did. It was a marvelous message. If you had to tell somebody, "I want to start reading the Bible, where should I start?" I would suggest just read the message of Jesus as he sat on that rock on the mount by the Sea of Galilee and shared a message with the people. Listen to the prayer that he prayed. And so that's where he begins his ministry in obedience to his heavenly Father, fulfilling his role that he had as the Messiah. And then we read at the close of that message, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law, the ones that they were accustomed to having in the temple. You know, you have to understand that somebody that finally got a job as a priest to be able to teach the people that came to the temple in Jerusalem would be honored by that position, maybe nervous to fulfill that role. But Jesus didn't have any problem with that. He created the universe. He was there and helped form Adam and Eve and put them on the face of this earth to begin the human race. And he knew everything there was to know about every planet, every star, every asteroid, anything that existed in the universe. He had made it all. And so naturally, he's going to speak to these 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, up to 4,000 people we read. He would teach them with authority because he knew who he was. He knew everything that he said was totally right, that he wasn't going to make a mistake ever. And so they were amazed, not only the fact that he was a good speaker, but that he had the content that they needed to hear, the message they wanted to hear, and the message that they were going to give their lives for. And so when a young man came to him, who was a rich young ruler, he's been called, in Luke 18, and asked him, "Rabbi, what must I do to inherit eternal life? How can I get to heaven when I die?" And Jesus told him, "Keep the commandments." And he says, "I've done that since I was just a little boy. All my life I've kept the commandments." And that's when Jesus looked into this man. Yeah, and, I know we're not Greek scholars, but if you just do a little reference work, you'll find out that the verb that is used there is not to look at, but to look into. And so he examined the heart of this young man. He looked at the very soul of this young man, and it says that he loved it. He really, really was impressed. And so he told him, "Well, there's only one thing you need to do. You need to go and sell everything you have, and then come and follow me." He's inviting him to be an apostle. He's inviting him to be one of the principal disciples in his ministry. What an opportunity. But he turned it down because he had too many goods, had too much in the way of riches here on this earth, and he didn't want to sell it. He didn't want to give it up. He didn't want to let the poor have it like Jesus suggested. No, he wanted to keep his goods, keep his riches, and then be a buddy to Jesus somehow. But that's not the way it's going to work. Jesus said, "Give it all up. Come and follow me. Let the poor have what you've got, and you come follow me." And he went away sad. He went away sad because he was not willing to do that. And I want to suggest that I believe that even though the Bible doesn't say so, that Jesus probably went away sad too. If he loved him and then got turned down by this young man and his offer wasn't accepted, I think probably Jesus was also very disappointed. And I think there are a lot of people today that disappoint God because the opportunity is there right in front of them to be one of his disciples, to be one of his workers, one of the people that really believe with all their heart in him, and they don't do it. But Jesus was having an impact on the lives of a lot of different people. And then in Mark 11:28, trouble starts. They come to Jesus after he has created a scene at that temple. As a little boy, he sat on the steps and talked, as we saw with, I don't know if it was on steps, the Bible doesn't say that. But he was there at the temple and was discussing things. I'm sure he sat down sometime, but he was talking to these smart men, these wise men, these teachers of the law. And they really were impressed with him. But now he's impressing them again. But this time he comes in, he sees that they're selling animals in there for use as sacrifices. And he sees people have tables with money on it and the money changers. People coming from all over the world that are Jewish and are coming there to worship and need to change their currency for some other currency and to get the money they needed to be able to make offerings and gifts to God. And he sees all of this banking going on, and he sees all of these animals in there. And he turns over the tables of the money changers and he runs the animals out of the temple. Well, you can imagine the people that had their money on the table, they were doing the exchange, the people that had the animals and brought them in there to sell, they weren't real happy with that. They had to be really, really disappointed. And so they asked him about what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you the right to come in here and turn over the table, to spill my money on the floor, to drive my animals out of the temple? I'm selling these animals. Who gave you the authority to do this? They asked. They challenged it. And that was just the beginning of the challenges that Jesus was going to face. They come to him later and say, should we pay taxes to Caesar? No, the Jews have been invaded by the Romans, and the Romans were dominating their lives, ruling over them, and they wanted to get back to the days of King Solomon and King David and others and have their land under their control. And these were invasions that had taken place, and invaders that were occupying these positions. And so they hated Caesar, and they hated the Romans. And they had zealots that would go out in the middle of the night, take daggers and stab Roman soldiers if they could. Insurrections. It was everywhere. And so paying taxes to Caesar wasn't something they really wanted to do. They didn't want to finance the Roman Empire as he controlled their lives. And so they asked, should we do that? And of course, they know if Jesus says no, he's in trouble with the Romans. If he says yes, he's in trouble with the Jews because they don't think that they should have to pay any kind of tribute to Rome. And so Jesus is in this impasse. And what does he do? He says, give me a coin. Whose image is on this coin? Well, it's, a symbol of the face and the head of Caesar. And he said, well, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and give to God the things that are God's. And they couldn't answer. They didn't know what to do. So then we'll come up with something a little better than that. That coin thing didn't work. Let's imagine that according to the Jewish law, if a woman has a husband and he dies and she's not had a child with that man, then his brother is supposed to marry her so that she can have a child that would be in his bloodline. And so they come up with this little story about a woman who had 7 different husbands. Married a man, he died. Married another man, he died. I know in Kelly's family, she had a situation where Evelyn had how many husbands? I think 5. And, she was pretty. I saw her picture. Got to know her, yeah. But I don't think I'd have married that woman, no matter what circumstances there might have been. Too many of her husbands were dying. But but in this case, 7 supposed husbands have died. And she never had a baby by any of them. So she dies. Now in the resurrection, whose wife is she going to be? They asked Jesus. Now then at the resurrection, whose wife will she be of the seven, since all of them were married to her? And Jesus says, you just don't know what you're talking about. It's no problem. You are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. There's not going to be married life and children being born into the family and bloodlines and all of that sort of thing. That's not going to exist. Well, they kind of ripped away their argument. One of the things I have to tell you today is when I was studying the first course I ever took at a Christian university after becoming a child of God, I realized as I came into the first class, the life of Christ, and we were studying and we got down to the Sermon on the Mount, I really was blown away by that. But when we got to chapter 22 of Matthew, I guess I was argumentative as a kid, maybe as an adult too. But I saw these arguments that Jesus had with these people and how he just wiped them out. I thought once, I don't think even if I get an offer to, I don't think I'm ever going to try and play chess against Jesus Christ. There would be no way I could win. And I had an experience in Kazakhstan that sort of served like that. I was with this guy that was Kazakh, and he wanted to play chess with me. He has a lot of Russian friends who taught him how to play chess. And I made a few moves, he made a few moves, and then he just wiped everything off the board with his hand and arm. You don't know how to play chess. And he refused to play with me anymore. And I think that he wasn't nearly as wise or smart as Jesus would have been. And if I never had that encounter with him. But Jesus, in every case, answers their questions and puts them to shame. And so we read in Matthew 22, continue that same chapter, 41 through 43. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, what do you think about the Messiah? Now here's, it's kind of like you move on chessboard, I move on chessboard, we take turns. And this was Jesus's move. They had asked him questions, and he was able to answer intelligently, wisely. But now he asked them a question. You guys are so smart, you know the law so well. Let me ask you a question. What about the Messiah? Whose son is he? Well, they knew the scriptures well enough to know that the Messiah was the son of David. Matter of fact, Jesus was called the son of David because he's a descendant of King David. But then Jesus asked him, and this comes out of Psalm 110, verse 1. He said to them, how is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, the Holy Spirit of God, calls him Lord? Okay, David's father, or at least the one who came before this individual is called the Messiah. And so the Messiah is the son of David. So why would a man call his son my Lord? In a family, a father could be the ruling person that's in charge, the patriarch, but the kids would be respectful of him, not him being that respectful of his kids, to call all of his kids his lords. No. And so when he asked him that question, how is it possible then if the Messiah is the descendant of David, that David would call the Messiah his Lord? How is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? No one could say a word in reply. And from that day on, no one dared to ask him any questions. Okay, question and answer period's over. Why? The Q&A is finished. Why? Because he makes a fool out of us every time we ask him a question or bring up any subject. He's just too wise. He's too smart, and we can't handle it. And so don't ask any more questions. Let's don't do that. Got to take a different approach. Well, Jesus gets there first and says, which one of you can prove that I'm a sinner. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? If I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? John 8:46. So he's saying, I'm telling you the truth. Everything I've said is right. Every argument I've made, you can't counter. And so why won't you just believe that I am who I say I am and that I'm right in what I'm teaching? Why do you resist? Why do you oppose me? Well, that's a challenge he's making to them now. He's already given them a hard time by giving them wonderful answers to their questions. He's asked them a question they can't answer, and told them also why he had the authority to turn tables over in the temple. Everything was going Jesus' way, and they hate him, and they're ready to attack him in any way they can. So he says, okay, you want to attack me in some way? Why don't you just tell everybody here the sins that I have committed? Tell them what I did wrong. Tell them about my errors. And the answer was, you don't have any errors. And so we can't blame you for anything. And so his innocence was his testimony. And then you go over to John 7:46, and we read that the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees in the Sanhedrin, which was their courts, sent what we would call the court policemen today. We had that, had been a term that was modern. They were the guards. And these were not Roman soldiers. These were just, the people that worked in authority as policemen in the temple and the synagogues. And so they got together and they said, bring us Jesus. We want Jesus to be brought over here. We want to question him. And so they're not going to ask him a question in front of all the witnesses in the street about religion and so on, because Jesus made a fool of them every time they tried that. So bring him in here, we're going to interrogate him. And the soldiers went out and came back and didn't bring him. Jesus didn't come with them. And they didn't dare bring him. They heard him. They listened to what he was saying. They waited until he finished his little dialogue or whatever he was doing, and then they were going to take him in, and they couldn't do it. And when they asked, why did you bring him? Why didn't you arrest him? Why didn't you just grab him and drag him through the streets and bring him here? And they said, no one ever spoke the way this man does. That's what the guard said. Nobody is like this guy. This guy's very different. And we were afraid to arrest him. Well, that's also the same thing happened when they decided to arrest Jesus in the end, and then get the soldiers down. They got the Romans on their side. You got people like Judas that are willing to betray Jesus. And so they go into the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's been praying on the Mount of Olives, and they all of a sudden decide they're going to arrest him and take him in. So when they come out there to get him, Jesus asked them, who are you looking for? And they said, Jesus. And he says, that's who I am. And when he said that, the soldiers all started backing up and fell down on the ground. They stumbled and fell. Just the very expression, yeah, that's me. I'm Jesus, was so frightening to them that they stumbled and fell. Some of the songs Kathy picked up, she wanted to lead today, have this very same message in it. And that's the personality of Jesus. But you're talking about, let's be honest, we're talking about God who has become man, and men are trying to compete with him in knowledge, wisdom, in any kind of questioning. Jesus is going to win. They're going to lose. And I think we all need to realize that in my life, I don't need to question God. I just need to be obedient. I don't need to challenge him. I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose if I'm not his servant. And so after they arrest him, take him in, they eventually drag him before Pilate after he's been, before Caiaphas and Annas and all these other Jewish leaders. They take him to Pilate. They know that if they're going to have him crucified, they're going to have Roman authority to do that. So they bring him in and put him before Pilate. Pilate probably asked him some of the same questions the Jews had. I know that he asked, what have you done? Why are these people critical of you? Why do they want me to put you to death? And Jesus wasn't answering. And so he says, you're not going to answer me? You know who I am? You know the authority I have? I could have you put to death. I could have you crucified. Jesus said, you think you're powerful. but you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. And Pilate understood what he was saying. You know, you're just a helpless, weak man, and you wouldn't be able to do anything to me if God didn't permit it. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. And Pilate was really afraid of Jesus. He really was. That's why he wanted to turn Barabbas loose and get him out of jail and put him up on a cross or something, because let's get a swap here, a prisoner exchange or something going. But no, that wasn't going to work. And Jesus wasn't going to allow it. He'd come to die on the cross in order to redeem us from our sins, innocence being slaughtered in order to cover our guilt. And so his wife came to him and said, I had a dream last night about this man. Don't hurt him. Don't kill him, because I've been warned basically by God in a dream not to, do anything to be critical of this Jesus. That's a case, sweetheart, you don't want. And Pilate knows his wife's in the background waiting to see what he's going to do with this guy called Jesus. And Jesus is the one that's not trembling. He's the one that's not afraid. He did a little of that over in the Garden of Gethsemane. He literally had blood come out of his pores because he was so worried about dying. But he said, not my will, but thy will be done. And then he went with the soldiers voluntarily. He could have called 10,000 angels, as the song says, and as the scriptures verify, to deliver him. He only needed one angel, Gabriel or Michael. Either one could have taken care of all of the soldiers in the world at that time. But he could have called 10,000 angels, but he didn't do it. He didn't do it because he came to die, and that's what he was going to do. And so, stand amazed as you look at Jesus. Think about your own life. Think about what he means to you and how much you appreciate him, how much you adore him. I really did believe in Jesus before I studied Matthew 22 in that class on the life of Christ. But after I went through all of those arguments and his wonderful responses, his logic, his wisdom, his great spirit, his innocence, when I came out of that study, I was in love with Jesus. I really was. It's kind of like somebody gets married and they're not sure if they ought to marry that jerk or not, but then after they do, they find out he's a nice guy. And, I really fell in love with Jesus after I went through the Gospel of Matthew. And I recommend it to you highly. But the idea is this: love him, adore him, admire him, worship him. Come here every week to learn more about him. Listen to him. Read what he has said that's recorded for you. And then when you want to be smart, really smart, and we all tend to be more or less a little bit stupid, don't you think? And when you want to get really wise, then I highly recommend that you open your ears and listen to what Jesus is saying to you, and then get down on your knees. And if anyone lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. And I think about Solomon and the mistakes he made. We've got the story of Solomon. So we know that when we ask for wisdom and God gives us wisdom and God helps us in our decisions in every aspect of life, then we ought to appreciate that and listen to him and follow him and not make a mess of our lives like Solomon did with all those crazy women. And we can learn. We can learn from what Jesus teaches us, and then look at the opportunities we have to ask God for wisdom and get on our knees and ask God, help me. Help me in every decision I make. And that is something that all of us need to do. We don't need to be making any life decisions without praying. I know that Tommy and Kathy are running a risk in making this big move. They've had a hard time getting enough boxes even to put all that stuff in, and how they're going to send it, and they raised the price on the moving van. And as I talk to Kathy and Tommy, they both say it's a God thing. everything's going to work out. God's going to be with us, and they're praying for God's blessing. But not just that, they are also admitting their need for God in their life. And every one of us, Heidi, I'm sure, has been talking to God during this time that she's going through all this therapy and everything, chemo. And, you know, there's just so many decisions we have to make in life. And if we want to be wise, which I like using a more common term, smart, we're going to ask God to guide us and help us and show us what to do and not make all those decisions without Him. Or we're going to, like Solomon, make a fool of ourselves with all those crazy women running around with all the idols in their hands. Let's do what God wants us to do. And to those that are on Zoom today, we got a lot of people out of town that are Zooming in. Thanks. Glad you're with us today. And I hope the lesson's been good for you as well. We love you very much. And I might be able to come now and close out with some announcements, very important announcements today. But Tommy and Kathy, we love you. We appreciate you so much. And are grateful for what you've done to bless our lives and help this church during the time you've been here.
Thank you, Bob. We do have some announcements.